Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So you might be wondering why this video is posted so early. Well, as I've done before, final predictions will be posted at 7:45 a.m. the day of the election. And today, when you're seeing this, and tomorrow, based on my time, and if members are seeing this early, there will be very critical elections throughout much of Europe happening on the east and mostly on the west. We have three general elections which could determine the course of these countries, two very critical ones, and one that's somewhat critical, but the result is very expected. So the biggest one is Poland. So Poland recently went over a little bit of instability due to the leftist civic coalition, the KO, taking control of the parliament in the 2023 Polish parliamentary election. PIS got the most seats, which is the Law and Justice. They're like more, they're pretty conservative for like a European party. They're kind of Trumpian. But they are pretty conservative, just not too right wing populist. But even though they got the most seats, the Civic Coalition was able to form government. They're supposedly big tent and center right, but for the most part, they are the leftist party of Poland. They're not like communist like the left, or I don't think the third way is a little bit. It would be considered somewhat leftist, but it looks like in Poland, the Civic Coalition is set to flip back the presidency. Uh, we don't fully know the how this election will play out yet, obviously, but we don't know if it'll head to a second round. It's looking like you will have a second round. There's quite a few parties here. The main ones to keep track of, you have the Civic Coalition pulling ahead, but you have Law and Justice, their candidate, pulling not too far behind. They were actually closing in for a little bit there on the Civic Coalition. It was starting to narrow up a bit, especially as this third one, coalition or confederation, not coalition, confederation, which is like what you would consider right wing populists. They're pretty right wing. They're probably the option I support most, but I'm of course fine with Civic Coalition. But they collapsed a lot towards the end of the campaign, so it does look like more than likely, and I'd give it like a 95% chance that the Civic Coalition and Law and Justice will be heading to a runoff election. Now, conceivably, and this is within the realm of possibility, but kind of unlikely, you could see Law and Justice get first. You've seen right wing parties kind of overform across the globe. We don't know though. It's very likely that the Civic Coalition beats out Law and Justice for first. Now, there's a problem with that. This is a 6.2% delta between the two candidates, but when you head to a hypothetical second round, we have the Law and Justice candidate put up against the Civic Coalition candidate. It's narrowed in some recent polling, but for the most part, it's wider than a 6 point margin. Um, like I said, it seemed like it was narrowing for a little bit, but the margin of victory has extended itself. Like I'm not gonna say that the Civic Coalition. I'm not sure where these polls are, but there's some with them getting like 60% of the vote. I think that's delusional. I think that's stupid. But you have had some show it kind of close. I also think those are outliers. But I'm not predicting that election, am I? I think this will determine if the runoff is competitive or not. Um, I think if you see the Law and Justice candidate, no, now Rocky, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but if you see Law and Justice overperform in this initial round, there's a chance it could be competitive in the runoff. Obviously, the Civic Coalition is heavily favored as of now. Um, I think Law and Justice one, two, yeah, they've been in office for two elections straight. Just anti-incumbency is pushing them away, and even so, in 2020, Duda, who was an independent, but when you become president of Poland, you usually resign from your party, and then he was backed in his re-election by Law and Justice. Even he barely won. in this election over his challenger. So it wouldn't be surprising if the Civic Coalition ended up winning this election by a lot. I'd say for now, I'd say that they lead about 5% in the first round. If I had to give percents for each candidate, and I'm only going to do the top three major candidates, I'd say the Civic Coalition gets like 32%. Um, I think Law and Justice has some momentum, so I think they get like maybe 27, 28%. That comes mostly from Confederation. You've seen mostly right wing populist parties have underperformed the polls. Think like One Nation. Uh, Usually they've done worse, and a lot of the traditionally conservative parties have done better. Really, the only example to the contrary is the UK local elections, but that is also kind of because Reform is being taken seriously as the main Conservative Party. Even in the UK general election 2024, they underperformed the polls. So I'd say at the end of the day, Confederation gets like maybe 11 to 10%, which would be a pretty bad result for them. Wouldn't be terrible. I think in 2020, I'm not sure how well they did in 2020. Yeah, Confederation, they got 6.78%, which means that it'd be an improvement from here, but it really wouldn't. It wouldn't point towards Confederation being taken seriously as like a legitimate opposition to Law and Justice. If I were talking to a Polish voter, I'd say either vote for Confederation if you like want to protest vote. Probably heads to a runoff, but I'd recommend voting for Law and Justice. You definitely need. I think Law and Justice kind of has to place first here because you need that momentum heading into the runoff election. So I'd recommend if you're thinking about voting for Confederation, they're almost certain to not make the runoff. Just vote for Law and Justice. It makes it easier. But this could be a competitive election. It'll be fun to watch. But I do think as of now, the Civic Coalition is slightly poised to win the first round. I'd say, if I had to guess, for the most part, they run it up more. You can see like the east-west, or like the former German areas. You can even see like the makeup of the specific uh, county. I'm not sure what they're called. Uh, Powiat, but you can see the specific makeup of them. I'd say the Civic Coalition picks off a lot of these ones that went narrowly to Duda, runs it up a lot in those former areas, and you see some of like the conservative heartland. Maybe the vote share goes down because you see Confederation take a little bit there. Um, we also see some of the areas around these cities. The Civic Coalition does better, but that's not the only election up on May 18th. That's not the only election we will be covering, or I won't be covering. I'll be on another stream. Luke J. Gagnon, Great Lakes Perspective. I'll probably link either the stream or his channel in the description or pin a comment on it. That's not the only election happening. We have a Romania presidential election happening. This is the second round. I didn't stream the first round because one, I couldn't find a site to stream it on. Two, I thought it'd be relatively uneventful. But George Simeon, who is a far cry from Georgescu, Georgescu was legitimately a threat to the political establishment, an independent. He was accused of having some Russian backings in this election, even though he won. If you look at the opinion polls um, for the second round, he was favored to win quite easily um, over his more liberal opposition. Even or USR. Wait, my bad. Different one. It'd be here. Yeah. So even though he was favored to win quite easily, and even in the 2025 election, like if you hit 50% of the first round, you don't go to a runoff. Originally in the polls, Georgescu was winning quite easily. There was a legitimate chance he could get 50% of the first round, but he would have had to a runoff. He would have won it easily, but he was barred from running because democracy is a fickle thing, and obviously Um, banning candidates is how you save democracy. So true, so true. But yeah, it's a disgrace that he isn't able to run. But yeah, the relatively competitive election between George Simeon, more of a right wing populist nationalist candidate, not as good as Georgescu, but still pretty good. On the issues facing Nikasor Dan. I'm not sure how to pronounce his first name, but he's more of the establishmentarian. He's kind of conservative, but not nearly as good as Simeon or Georgescu, and backed by a lot of the establishment. He's also running. It looks close. If you go to the opinion polls here, it's actually looking like Dan is slightly favored in some of these polls. Though Simeon started off with the momentum. Stuff like Atlas Intel has him up by point 0.9. I will say Atlas Intel, I would take that with a grain of salt, seeing as in the initial round, I'm looking for their final poll. Yeah, in the initial round, they had Simeon up 6% over Tedesco and up, what is that, 8% over Dan. He ended up 20% over Dan, so they did seem to significantly underestimate his support, and if they haven't corrected for that, there's a legitimate chance they get him an upset. I know the betting odds show that Dan is favored. I don't trust the betting odds. The betting odds are complete bullshit. I'd say Simeon definitely can lose. This is going to be a competitive race. You've seen some endorsements here. I'm looking for the endorsements here. Um, of the former candidates. Yeah, here. You've seen some of them endorse Dan. None of them have endorsed Simeon, but like the problem is, especially here, Antonescu, 20%. If that splits 50-50, Simeon wins. And him not endorsing, even if he endorsed Dan, like then he's tied with Simeon. That's the problem. Like Dan has gotten tiny endorsements, but like these two big endorsements on the table, he didn't get either of them. So like I think you will have most of the people, most of the voters who voted for the other candidates split against Simeon. I do think Dan won't lose by another 20-point margin. I'd say it's about a 5-point margin for Simeon as of now, but I do think Simeon ends up winning. Um, as a county map, I think you'll see these areas, which, if I'm not mistaken, these areas are ethnically Hungarian, if I'm not mistaken, and lean very much against Simeon because Simeon is pretty anti-Hungarian. Though I think Dan is also not the most pro-Hungarian. Um, but you will see these areas lean towards Dan. Dan might even win the vote within Romania if it's very narrow. But I think you see these rural areas and these coastal areas turn out heavily for Simeon, and I think you see the diaspora throughout the rest of the world turn out pretty heavily for Simeon. That's another thing about the Atlas and Toe poll. I don't even think they polled diaspora. So that's a big part of Simeon's coalition. Like if you had the diaspora to this poll, Simeon is leading. So I do think Simeon pulls it off. I could definitely see Simeon losing. Dan is in this race. I'm not going to say it's going to be a Simeon landslide. I could see it being a Simeon landslide if you have a similar polling miss to the initial round, or even 2024. I could see Dan pulling it off. I could even see Dan pulling off by a somewhat wide margin if the anti-Simeon vote consolidates itself. But as of now, I would say Simeon wins by like 5 to 6%. It's going to be close, but Simeon definitely has the edge going into this election. But we have a third one. Yeah, it's like the Super Tuesday of foreign elections. Out of Portugal, this one isn't the most interesting. Luis Montenegro had some scandals. So he called a snap election, which, by the way, you had an election in 2024, you had an election in 2022, an election in 2019. I think Portugal's done with elections. Like, the fact that this parliament barely lasted a year is kind of insane. Like, who do they think they are, France? But opinion polling shows like the exact same as before. It looks like I think PSD is like slightly conservative leaning, or conservative leaning for Portugal, um, and then PS the Socialist Party, and people are like, oh my god, how dare you call leftism abroad socialism and communism? That's not at all. They're called the socialists. The French left is called the socialists. They are socialists. You don't have to be like, no, they're just moderate Democrats, and in fact, they would be every right wing party would be a Democrat in America. Like, no, these are socialists. Oh my god, I these people are these people are like borderline communists in the Socialist Party. I, it's insane. But it looks like the Social Democrats are like kind of right wing to left wing kind of center are going to make gains. The Socialists might lose a little bit. The big thing is it does look like Chega, the right wing populist party, has momentum heading into the election, which usually that usually if you have momentum going into election, especially with these multi-party elections, you will overperform. But I'd say it looks like the Social Democrats and the Socialists will once again coalition. But by the way, in this poll, the Social Democrats and Chega are a majority. And I even think in the last parliament, um, you need 116. If you had 80 to 50, you get 130. But no, we must coalition with the socialists because right wing populism is evil. But who knows? In this election, we could potentially see Che go overperform. That's probably the best thing that can happen. But Portugal's going to be kind of a nothing ever happens. I think Social Democrats gain. Socialists, I mean, they it looks like they will lose. Chig, I think, is going to break even, and then the rest are completely unimportant. So, yeah, not really interesting, but I mean, it's something. But the main ones are Poland and Romania. Poland, we won't know yet. The runoff, if I'm not mistaken, um, the runoff would be, uh, I think June 1st, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Yeah, they don't show it here. But if no candidate reaches 50%, which would be very, very unlikely, then a runoff will be held. And we'll cover that runoff at a different time. But for now, final predictions Civic Coalition leads by like 5%. Due to Confederation underperforming, or due to Law just overperforming at the expense of Confederation. Romania, Simeon wins 5-6, and Portugal, nothing ever happens. PSD, PS coalition. Anyways, thank you for watching. Going to be an interesting election night. Over on the Great Lakes perspective, make sure to watch. I'm not sure what time it starts. I'm not even sure if they're like remotely in proximity to each other. So we'll be watching them at the same time. I'm not sure about that, but I will hopefully be on that stream, barring any uh, extraneous circumstances. I guess is the word. Maybe it's not. Something really wrong has to go. Something has to go really wrong for me to not be on that stream. But anyways, thank you for watching. Godspeed. Tester.